All right, let's dive in. We've got the congressional records from February 4th, 2025. And let me tell you, it's a doozy.
Oh, is it ever? We're talking everything from energy to veteran affairs to technology to, well, even a little bit of Grammy buzz snuck in there.
Grammy buzz in the congressional record? That's a new one.
Oh, yeah, Congress gets in on the pop culture action every now and then. You'd be surprised.
Well, all right then. Let's get into it. Himes definitely came out swinging, huh? Didn't hold back any punches when it came to the new administration.
Yeah, no kidding. He's raising some big concerns about Congress maybe giving up too much power. Specifically, he's worried about not enforcing things like the TikTok ban and even questioning the whole idea of birthright citizenship.
Yeah, and I saw that a few other lawmakers echoed those concerns too. It's like there's this underlying worry about the whole balance of power shifting too much.
Right. It's not just about individual policies. It's about, like, the bigger picture. Is the executive branch getting too strong? Is Congress doing enough to keep things in check? Those are the questions floating around.
Big questions, for sure. And then he went on to talk about the FBI, saying how important they are, especially with all the stuff going on with terrorism and fentanyl. Felt like he was almost defending them.
Oh, absolutely. He sees them as being under attack and he's pushing back. It's all tied into that theme of national security, which pops up again and again in these records. It's like he's saying, look, we need a strong FBI if we want to keep the country safe. Don't mess with them.
Okay, moving on from national security to uh, something that always gets people fired up. Education and economics.
Mm.
That whole proposal from the president about ending student loan forgiveness, wow, that really kicked the hornet's nest, didn't it?
You said it. It's a real lightning rod issue. You've got some representatives questioning whether it's even legal, and then you've got others focused on, like, what it means for colleges and universities and the economy as a whole.
Wow. And then you have Rep. Thompson coming in with his own critique of the president's economic policies, talking about how it's affecting things that everyone can relate to, like grocery prices. He's saying it's hitting people right where it hurts.
Yeah, right in the wallet. And that's something everyone understands.
For sure. And things didn't cool down much when it came to diversity and technology either. I mean, Rep. Cisneros was pretty outspoken about her concerns regarding the president's stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, and she didn't mince words when it came to those dealings with Elon Musk. Calling it a coup, that's some serious language, right? Shows you how deep her concerns run.
Yeah, almost sounds like she's worrying about some kind of power grab or something.
It's that fear of power being concentrated in the wrong hands. Like, what happens when you have someone like Elon Musk with all his influence and access to information so closely aligned with the president? It makes people nervous.
And that brings up a whole bunch of questions about, like, transparency and accountability. Technology is getting so intertwined with everything. How do we make sure that power isn't being abused and that people's rights are protected? It's a whole new ballgame.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Social Security. I mean, that's something that's on a lot of people's minds, right? And Rep. Larson, he's pretty worried about the fact that benefits aren't keeping up with the cost of living.
Yeah, and he's not the only one. Especially with prices going up everywhere, people are struggling to make ends meet. And for those who rely on Social Security, it's a huge problem.
He's also sounding the alarm about all that data that could potentially be misused if the president and Elon Musk get their hands on it. Social Security recipient information, that's pretty sensitive stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's a big concern. And he makes a good point about how Social Security is connected to the local economy. It's not just about individual checks. It's about that money flowing back into communities, supporting businesses, and keeping things moving.
It's all connected, isn't it? All right. And speaking of potential overreach, there's definitely some growing concern about how federal workers are being treated under the new administration. We're hearing about agencies being relocated, maybe even some constitutional violations happening. I even saw the term constitutional crisis being thrown around.
Wow, yeah, that's some strong language. It's definitely a call to action for people to get involved. If you're concerned about what's happening, now's the time to speak up. Contact your representatives, go to town hall meetings, join advocacy groups, whatever it takes to make your voice heard.
Make it known.
Absolutely. This is where citizen engagement becomes crucial.
All right. Next up, trade and the economy. Seems like that debate about tariffs just keeps going and going. A lot of worries about job losses, slower economic growth, and even tension with Canada.
Yeah, and what really drives it home are those real-world examples they bring up, like that bus company that's facing way higher costs because of tariffs on buses coming from Canada. It's not just some abstract concept. It's affecting real people and businesses.
It definitely makes you think about the ripple effects of these policies, how they play out in unexpected ways. Speaking of real-world impact, let's talk about the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Act. Seems like a pretty straightforward thing, right? Provide some much-needed funding for security?
Yeah, and you'd think it would be smooth sailing, but even something as seemingly uncontroversial as that can get tangled up in the legislative process. It's actually a good example of how things can get complicated in Washington.
What do you mean?
Well, the bill itself has a lot of support from both sides of the aisle, but there's criticism that it doesn't actually authorize or fund the grant program directly. It's more like a roundabout way of doing it due to certain spending rules that they have to follow. They're calling it fiscal gymnastics.
Ah, okay, so even when everyone agrees on something, getting it done can be a real headache.
You got it. Sometimes it feels like they're playing a whole different game up there.
All right, let's move on to some issues that are really important to Native American communities. There's a lot of focus on Alaska Native concerns in these records, with two bills in particular taking center stage, H.R. 42 and H.R. 43.
Right, so HR 42 is all about protecting vulnerable Alaska Natives, those who are elderly, blind, or disabled. It's about making sure that certain payments they receive don't affect their eligibility for other programs that they need.
Basically, making sure they don't get penalized for getting the help they're entitled to.
Exactly.
And what about H.R. 43? That one sounds a little more complicated. The Alaska Native Village Municipal Lands Restoration Act? That's a mouthful.
Yeah, but it's a really important bill. It's all about returning land that's currently being held in trust by the state back to the Alaska Native Village corporations. It's about giving them more control over their ancestral lands.
Seems like a pretty big deal. Why are they doing that now?
Well, it's kind of a long story. Basically, there was this requirement in the 1971 Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act that said these lands had to be set aside for future municipalities. But a lot of those municipalities never actually happened, so the land just ended up kind of stuck.
So this is about righting a historical wrong and empowering these communities to decide their own future.
Precisely.
And we're also seeing legislation that focuses on another Native American group, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. H.R. 226, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Historic Lands Reacquisition Act. What's that all about?
Well, this one is about transferring some land that's culturally significant to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians from the Tennessee Valley Authority. It's located in Tennessee, and it's particularly important because a lot of their land was lost to flooding, so what's left is even more precious.
But it's about more than just ownership. It's about preserving their history and heritage.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that connection between Indigenous people and their land and the need to protect those ties.
All right, let's shift gears again and talk about well, a rather furry environmental issue. Nutria. These little critters are causing some big problems, aren't they?
Yeah, they might look cute, but they're wreaking havoc on the environment. The Nutria Eradication and Control Act is all about extending funding to try and keep their population under control, especially out in the San Joaquin Valley in California, where they've really exploded.
They're like the uninvited house guests that just won't leave, and they eat everything in sight.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
They cause serious damage to wetlands and agricultural lands, so keeping them in check is crucial.
Yeah, sounds like it. All right, so we've covered a lot of serious ground here, but I noticed there were some heartwarming moments in the Congressional Record, too. It's not all doom and gloom, right?
No, definitely not. There were a lot of representatives taking time to recognize people in their communities for all sorts of achievements and contributions. It's a nice reminder that there's a human side to all of this, that they're not just robots up there making decisions.
Right, like Rep. Joyce honoring the Presbyterian Village for 100 years of service to their community in Blair County. That's pretty incredible.
It is. And then you have Rep. Courtney recognizing Bethany Braman Foster for achieving 10 years of sobriety. That's a huge personal victory worth celebrating.
Absolutely. And then there's Rep. Kamlager Dove, who was clearly excited about Kendrick Lamar's big night at the Grammys, winning 5 awards. She also gave a shout out to Beyoncé for finally winning Album of the Year, and even pointed out that she won Best Country Album, which is pretty amazing.
It's cool to see them acknowledging these cultural moments, It makes them seem a little more relatable, like they're plugged into what's going on in the world.
Makes you think they're human after all.
Exactly.
And of course, there were also some somber moments, with several representatives offering condolences and tributes to those who were lost in that plane crash over the Potomac. Rep. Capture specifically mentioned the members of the figure skating community who were on board.
It's a reminder that tragedy can touch anyone, and Congress, in these moments, reflects the grief and sorrow of the nation. It's a shared experience.
Yeah. And then there was Rep. Yakim, who spoke about the victims of that supermarket shooting in Elkhart, Indiana, a real tragedy. And he also took the time to acknowledge the first responders who put their lives on the line.
It's important to remember those who are affected by these events and to honor their memory.
Absolutely. And now back to the political arena. Rep. Cohen brought up the January 6th insurrection, reminding everyone about the importance of unity and condemning the attack on the Capitol. He also called out the president for blaming diversity, equity, and inclusion for the plane crash, saying that those initiatives have never caused any deaths in this country.
It's a strong statement, and it definitely reflects a certain perspective on the events of January 6th and the current political climate.
Yeah. And then you have Rep. Lamalfa, who's talking about the importance of hydropower as a clean energy source. He's worried about all the dams being removed and a potential impact on the power grid. Seems like he's pushing for less red tape when it comes to clean energy production.
Right. He's advocating for a certain approach to energy policy, one that prioritizes hydropower and streamlined permitting processes. It's part of that ongoing debate about balancing environmental concerns with our energy needs.
Always a tough balancing act.
For sure.
And finally, we have Rip Olszewski, who's reminding everyone that one of the big campaign promises was to lower costs for Americans. He's not happy about the fact that there haven't been any votes or committee hearings on legislation to address this issue. It's like he's saying, hey, you promised to do something, now let's see some action.
It definitely reflects that frustration that a lot of people are feeling, like, where's the follow-through?
Words are one thing, but actions speak louder.
Right. Exactly. And that's something we'll be digging into even further as we continue our deep dive. There's so much more to uncover, so stay tuned.
Can't wait.
All right, picking up where we left off, remember Rep. Olszewski's comments about the lack of action on lowering costs? Seems that's a pretty big concern for a lot of folks.
Yeah, definitely a recurring theme throughout the day. It's like this undercurrent of anxiety. People are feeling the pinch.
Absolutely. And it's not just about day-to-day expenses either. The House got a report on how inflation's hitting retirement savings, and let me tell you, it's not a pretty picture.
So it's like a double whammy. Worried about today and worried about tomorrow.
Exactly. Speaking of things to worry about, there was also this certificate of compliance for consumer products that the House received.
Okay, certificate of compliance. Sounds a little dry, doesn't it?
Yeah, maybe on the surface, but think about it. It's basically making sure that all those products we use every day, from toys to appliances to whatever, are safe and actually do what they're supposed to do.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that is pretty important. We don't want things exploding or falling apart on us.
Exactly. It's all about consumer protection and safety, stuff we often take for granted until something goes wrong.
Good point. All right, so shifting gears a bit, we also saw some stuff about what's happening internationally, like the situation in Lebanon. It's a reminder that there's a lot going on outside our borders that we need to be paying attention to.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The world's a complicated place, and what happens over there can definitely have an impact on what happens over here. We're all connected, whether we like it or not.
And that actually brings us back to something we talked about earlier, the whole idea of citizen engagement. We can't just sit back and expect things to magically get better, right?
Absolutely not. The Congressional Record, it can seem like a dry document, but it's a window into how our government works, what they're dealing with, and how they're making decisions that affect our lives. And it's up to us to stay informed and get involved.
So what's the takeaway here? What do we want listeners to walk away with?
Knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you can do to make a difference. You can follow legislation, reach out to your representatives, hold them accountable. It's all about being an active participant in our democracy.
It can seem overwhelming, though, right? There's so much information out there, so much noise. How do you even know where to start?
Start small. Pick a few issues that you're really passionate about and focus on those. You don't have to become an expert on everything overnight.
Yeah, and there are tons of resources out there to help you. Websites, news outlets, advocacy groups, social media, you name it. And don't forget, you can always reach out to your representatives directly.
That's right. Let them know what you think, what your concerns are, how these issues are affecting you and your community. Believe me, they pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like those calls and emails just disappear into the void, but they do make a difference.
They really do. It's about making your voice heard, and you don't have to do it alone. Find people who share your concerns, join groups, get involved in your community. Collective action is where it's at.
Strength in numbers.
Absolutely. The more people who are informed and engaged, the better our democracy works. That's the bottom line.
All right, we're back. And we've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into the congressional record. But the big question is, what does all this mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, that's the key, right? We've unearthed all this information, but information without action, it's just noise. The real power comes from understanding how to use this knowledge to actually engage with the political process.
So how do our listeners cut through all that noise and become more informed citizens? Where do they even start?
It can feel overwhelming, I get it. There's so much coming at us from all directions, news, opinions. It's a lot. But remember, you don't have to become a political expert overnight. Just start small. Choose a few issues that really speak to you, things you're passionate about.
That's a good point. It's about finding what makes you tick, what gets you fired up, and focusing your energy there. You can't be an expert on everything, right?
Right, exactly. Once you've got those key issues in mind, start following the legislative process, track bills that are related to those topics, see who your representatives are and what their stance is on those issues.
And there are tons of resources out there to help you do that, right? I mean, you've got government websites, news outlets, advocacy groups, social media, you name it. And don't forget, you can always attend town hall meetings.
Oh yeah, town halls are great. They give you a chance to really hear from your representatives directly and ask questions and sign up for email alerts, follow those social media accounts, stay in the loop.
And something else that's really important, and sometimes we forget this, is the power of direct communication. Reach out to your representatives, share your thoughts, your concerns. Let them know how these issues are affecting you, your family, your community.
Absolutely. Those calls, emails, letters, they do make a difference. Representatives, they pay attention to the volume and the content of those messages. It helps them understand what their constituents care about, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. It informs how they vote, how they represent their district.
Sometimes it feels like those messages just disappear into the void, but they really do matter.
They do. It's about making your voice heard. And you don't have to do it alone. Find people who share your passions, your concerns, join advocacy groups, participate in community forums, collective action. That's where the real power is.
Strength in numbers, right?
You've got it. The more people who are informed and engaged, the stronger our democracy becomes. That's the beauty of it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the congressional record from February 4th, 2025, what's the final thought we want to leave our listeners with?
The stuff we talked about today, these aren't just some abstract political debates happening in a vacuum. They have real-world consequences for all of us. And by staying informed, by getting involved, you become an active participant in shaping the future of our nation.
So don't be afraid to dive in, explore those issues, make your voice heard. It matters more than you think.
It really does. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the world of politics. You might be surprised at what you discover and the impact you can make.
And that's a wrap for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time, folks.